images of the Asante depict a very beautiful image. Thomas Edward Baldwick, who was there before the British took over, shows and tells of a picture that is enlightening because it separates what happened before the British came and after the British came. And you can see there that you have all types of things going on, from women holding knives and skulls, and you see these symbolic swords being held by important members of the society. Now, you also have houses, and the cool thing about the houses is that they're painted in the same way that most African houses are built, with this lower part being painted with a red color. Sometimes it's black, but it's the lower part that's painted, and the top part is painted in a different color, which again, this is very typical of Africa. You will see, I'll show you images. More than this, he also shows different images of people dressed in all kinds of cotton cloths. A lot of us associate the Asante with one type of cotton cloth, but they had a whole bunch of it. And a number of different people dressed in different ways and masks and stuff like that were made by the Asantini. And something interesting about these houses is that they have this typical African painting of the bottom, and then the painting at the top is different than the one at the bottom. You see this all over Africa. You see it in East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, especially the red bottom with the black top, but here it's white, it's left white. This usually mimics um, a lot of pottery that you see. But again, to me, something more interesting is rubber. As I knew that the Congolese had rubber, and I showed you in that other thing that the Congolese had used rubber since at least the 1400s. But I didn't know that the Asantini had rubber, and the way they used it is actually more consistent with how people interpret rubber, because the Congolese people used it for clothes, whereas the Asantini, you can see over here, it's written the kawachek, which the kawachek is this plant, the rubber plant, and it hasn't been vulcanized yet. The kawachek is to be met with here. The natives describe it as the product of one tree only, the olambu. Their method of collecting it is curious. After the incision is made in the tree, whence it oozes like a glutinous milk, they spread it over their arms and breasts with a knife, having first shaved themselves, that the hair of the skin may not be torn up when it is taken off, in the form of a plaster. It is either rolled up into balls to play with, or stretched over the heads of drums. They do not seem to apply it to any other use. They make their torches from the wood of which they form their canoes. The resinous parts are broken in small pieces and tied closely in very long leaves. The smaller ends is fixed to an. Okay, so that was the depiction of the rubber. And you can see there that they use it partially for drums, and they also use it to make small balls to play with. Now, I was trying to look for the Congolese when they use it for balls, but apparently that isn't as depicted. Now, making balls is actually easier than making a whole dress out of it. So the Congolese used to make dresses in the 1400s. So I think the Congolese people had more experience with this rubber than the Asante did. But you can see right here depicted the natives using rubber. Once again, the interesting thing is when you talk about sports or ball, or like sports or games or stuff like that that are used played in Africa, it's easy for the Europeans to always claim that the Europeans came with them at some point. And so to have direct evidence of people who were there at the time say like nope, actually all these technologies, all these sports, all these things, they come from independently from inside. It's very good. Now, I need to make sure you understand here that those images that I showed you were from the treaties of Formina, which shows that it happened in 1874. So those pictures were probably from 1874. And this guy, Thomas Edward Bodwick, who wrote about the rubber and all this other stuff in Asantini, he died in 1824. So the depiction he's depicting is before any of the stuff happened with the British. This is pre-colonial Africa. And it's interesting because the process he describes for getting the rubber out of the ground or out of the tree is the same as the one in Congo, as they depict in many books where the later people who conquered the Congo forced them to use their local method, but in a more painful way, where they smear rubber on their body and then they painfully scrape it off of their body. A process called coagulation. This mixture is then passed through rollers to remove excess water. That's just an explanation of how it works. Now, let's get to what they say in the 1500s about what they saw. Okay, so it says a large tree called Nzanda grows here. It is always green and endowed with wonderful qualities, as from its branches, which spread upward, descend others like threads, and these forcing themselves into the earth and taking root. Other trees multiply in like manner inside the outermost bark of this tree. So listen to that. Inside the outermost bark of this tree, a substance is found, which, when cleaned and prepared for use, makes clothes for the poorest of the people. Now, keep in mind that this is not bark cloth, because of course he knows what the bark of a tree is. But he says there's a substance inside the outermost bark of the tree. So he doesn't know, he doesn't recognize this substance. He just knows that they use it. And of course, remember we read in the other one in the 1800s that this milky substance, or the rubber, Indian rubber, is just so common as to be you couldn't even sell he couldn't even sell it for one piece of cloth. And so interestingly, the rubber is worn by the poorest. But that won't be a surprise if you consider the fact that he says it must be remembered that gold, silver, and other metals are not valued nor used as money in these countries. And so it happens that with gold and silver in abundance, either in mats or in coin, yet nothing can be brought except with lumache. In this island are 7 or 8 towns known in their language of the country of Libata. The principal one, called Il Santo Spirito, is where the governor resides.